Lost it.
There we go.
Um, so in your most recent video, I was listening to you make reference to the frame problem and relevance realization and coming to the point that we need to be less embarrassed about making reference to God on those problems. And would you agree that the source of the embarrassment that comes from talking about God, which you observe culturally, and you've also said you feel yourself, talking about your core experience, feeling on mushrooms, feeling yourself in the presence of the Christ being, and that when you talk about it, you can be as honest as you want to be, and that there's still this little feeling of embarrassment. Does that embarrassment come from the suspicion that there's not actually any shareable content to the word God because what we mean in any given moment is like a mirror of ourselves in whatever state we're in, and yet it purports to be the ultimate universal term. So there's this feeling of you're making yourself vulnerable to like the ultimate discordant note in a communication, and
Yeah.
how do we overcome that embarrassment? And should we overcome it entirely?
Hmm. Well, I mean, it's an awkward phase now, maybe that we're going through I mean, me as an individual, but maybe our society too, trying to recover what might feel like pre-modern, ways of speaking and thinking together. But I guess there's these two sides of me. There's the scholar and the philosopher that wants to be able to communicate meaningfully about ideas in a way that's accessible, um, and credible. Like, in other words, like people can believe it because it's established on principles that aren't overly subjective or idiosyncratic or whatever. But then there's this other side of me that's just a person who has these experiences and is a seeker and, a practitioner, like is searching spiritually for something authentic, and that has a certain, in the modern world, we'd say, well, that's fine, but do that in private. Um, Especially if you're trying to arrive at some kind of academic knowledge or some scholarly perspective, like all that spiritual religious stuff is something you should keep under wraps and put on the side and not mix together with what you think is philosophically valid. But those compartments, I mean, I can't compartmentalize like that. Never have been able to really, but I think especially, yeah, thinking about these big problems, the frame problem, or that would be a epistemological, or at least a way of thinking about cognition and how we, as John Vervaeke would say, realize relevance moment by moment. It seems like some kind of computational system wouldn't have the computational power to actually arrive at the right generalization from the limited data it would have from its environment. So there's something else going on, which seems to make organisms unique. And Vervaeke and a lot of the enactivist crew and cognitive science acknowledge there's something non-computational going on here, but they still want a naturalistic account, and they're not making reference to God or anything. But for me, I'm like, that problem at the cognitive science level, at the epistemological level, is actually connected to a deeper ontological issue or a cosmological issue related to like fine tuning, which is there's a kind of it's akin to the frame problem at a cosmological level, which is like the fundamental constants and the laws of physics could have been anything. But and if you throw off one decimal, you know, of any of these numbers that form the fundamental constants, like you don't get atoms forming stable. Like if you change the fine structure constant, it's like the strength of electromagnetism changes, and then like yeah, you don't get atoms, you don't get life, you don't get mind, and so there seems like there's some fine tuning there. And I think the same there's one ultimate solution to me to both of these problems, and that's that the possibility space is structured by some kind of divine act, which isn't determining what actually happens, but the field of possibilities available to us to actualize is is not just random. There's some implicit grain in the wood. Um, there are attractor states that don't determine what we decide to do, but that limit the field of possibility to what would be best to do, and we choose among those best options, something like
And,
that.
and the intellectual criticism there would be that um, you're saying there's intelligibility because of, um, rather than just there is intelligibility. Because when we say there's intelligibility shaped by, where do we draw the shaped by from? Is it the intricate watch problem, where you find the
Mm.
watchmaker, that you find the watch on the beach, and there's intelligibility that simply feels like it must be the product of an experiencing thinker on some level. Is that is intelligibility the same thing? Not is intelligibility the same thing, but is citing intelligibility the same thing as making that argument from the complexity of the clock? And yeah, I guess also, are we talking about intelligibility itself? Is there, and are we really just looking at that, whatever that is, whatever it is we're calling intelligibility, through a few different lenses, and one of them is a personality, like the intelligibility is the God we're talking about. We're not
Mm.
you know deducing that there is a God based on this intelligibility, but we're
It is God. Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Um, yeah. So in Whitehead's view of this, the order of the universe or the intelligibility of the universe is a function of the divine character. It's like that is an expression of the divine character. Um, and so it's not a God that stands apart from what's happening. It is that is the immanence of the divine is that intelligibility, is that order. Um, Someone said to me recently in a comment on a video, or maybe it was on Substack, that maybe instead of primordial nature of God, Whitehead should have used a word like logos to talk
Mhm,
about this,
mhm,
like the principle of intelligibility, and um, or perhaps the Neoplatonic term nous, like
mhm,
the divine intellect. And it's akin to that term, though. Whitehead's a little different than the Neo. Well, he's a Neoplatonist, but he's different from Plotinus because he's not describing some kind of emanation. Um, and he also has this consequent nature of God, which Plotinus doesn't have an equivalent of that. Um, but yeah, this is like panentheism, so that the divine is immanent in the world as the order of the world, that like God is why there's cosmos and not chaos. Um, but I think this is different from an old style like William Paley, God the Watchmaker type of argument, where there's no distinction made between possibility and actuality. I think for Paley, God actually created each organism, every species of organism as it is currently shaped was like deliberately, um, designed by God.
mhm,
Whereas what Whitehead is saying is that the field of possibilities were shaped by this primordial envisagement, as Whitehead puts it, and the way the actual universe unfolds is still full of contingencies and
mhm,
creaturely decisions. It's just that there are certain attractors um, that assure that some kind of organization emerges, but not a kind of organization that would be determined in advance, like the way that an engineer would design the gears of a watch and then set them in place.
Mhm.
Um, it's a more open-ended process of growth that's lured toward more and more beauty and uh, intense forms of organization. So
Mhm.
I think it's an important point to distinguish actuality and possibility. God's not shaping what actually occurs. God's shaping the field of possibilities that um, actual occasions can then be responsive to, right? So it's
Yeah.
not, this isn't creationism.
Right. 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 So yeah, God has the element of creativity as a pre-existing ingredient, and he's shaping the filters through
Hmm.
which it's going to express.
Yeah,
Um, and so, right, that's what makes God in this scheme relational, in that there's already something happening for God to respond and shape, which is creativity itself. Um,
right.
and so when we right, but then yeah, distinguishing those two things is difficult.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it's it's funny. I can move into these realms of trying to understand this abstract terminology. Um, and sometimes the words really have meaning, and other times I I can't find it. And so I end up going to the question of what's the problem we're trying to solve here.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to that. Like with the frame problem, relevance, realization, these feel like purely abstract problems because
Mm.
you're taking note of something self-evident in experience
Yeah.
and trying to just justify it
Mm.
when yeah, as if it's calling for a justification, or that, or like it doesn't exist if it isn't justified. Like the fact that an organism will realize relevance in one direction or another. That's simply what happens. And
Mm.
what problem are we trying to solve by d abstractly describing a process of logic that would allow that concept to check out for our intellect?
Mm.
Um, yeah, how do you think of that problem in the most immediate way?
Well, it's an abstract problem, but it's also a problem for like um, computer engineers and roboticists and stuff trying to figure out how to make AI machines effectively navigate environments.
Right.
Self-driving cars, for example, um, there's this issue of, you can feed the car massive amounts of data. You've got, hundreds of thousands, millions of Teslas driving around. They're getting all this data from the roads, but there's always going to be this um, limitation that all the data in the world doesn't automatically provide you with the right generalization. And what we see with organisms like human drivers seem to know what to do in totally novel situations because they can effectively generalize from past experience. And that capacity to effectively generalize from past experience um, isn't just a function of like processing huge amounts of data. We're not processing huge, on some level that we already have computers that can process more data than we can.
Mhm.
And so it's not a calculation problem.
Mhm.
There seems to be some other aspect of our organic form of um, self-organization, autopoiesis, our ability to maintain ourselves as living beings, having been the result of, co-evolving with particular environments. And there's something, um, yeah, deep in us that seems intrinsic to whatever it is that makes us alive that allows us to generalize in this way. And machines can't do it. So it's a very practical problem, when we're trying to make machines that would be better at it at least. Um,
Mhm.
and so when we think about this logically, it I think it forces us to consider those aspects of nature and life, physics and biology that are non-computable, that are not reducible to algorithmic processes. And that means, um, you know, I would say that even at the level of physics, there are indications that we need a principle of relevance realization just
Yeah.
to understand how, uh, that what would usually be talked of as like the transition from the quantum realm to the classical realm. Like, how do we get macroscopic, enduring objects when it seems like microscopically everything is just this quantum distribution, in fields of probability? What Vervaeke and cognitive scientists are talking about with the frame problem is they locate it at the biological level or at the level of animal life, nervous systems, and so on. But I think I'm trying to generalize this problem because I think it's related um, to fine tuning. It's related to um, how um, quantum collapse happens, and Whitehead provides us with like a way of thinking about the relationship between actuality and possibility, where these problems, it's not that they go away, it's that they they call for a solution that would entail um, basically bringing formal and final causation back into our understanding of nature,
Mhm.
our scientific understanding of nature. Um, Computers are supposed to work just like being fed data, and machine learning algorithms are supposed to be able to train themselves without needing to be designed. Um, but that doesn't seem to solve this frame problem. And so we need a different source of a new source of order
Yeah.
um, implicit in the nature of things. And so that's what I'm pointing to here with this making reference to Whitehead's God and eternal objects. It's like formal causality, final causality. That's how we solve the problem. So the frame problem is like um, natural science having pushed efficient causation, mechanistic causation as far as it will go. It's running into these paradoxes that are requiring us to reach for something more, these other forms of causality that inevitably raises theological questions.
Okay. So what I'm getting from that is it's about the gap between machines and organisms and trying to help machines become more like organisms by explaining why they never could fully close the gap. Um, or do you believe that gap could be closed where we could make machines fully auto-poetic and that what we're calling machines is our engagement in the process by which life reproduces itself, or are we learning the limits of are we going to eventually fully learn the limits of intellect by confronting that it's not, machines are not in fact our participation in life reproducing itself. They are not, an aberration, not that they're totally negative, but that the way we would most fruitfully make our contribution to life would be by focusing on deepening our connection with the organic forms that like precede and surround and comprise us, rather than pouring so much energy into um, trying to vitalize machines. Because
Mm.
do you ever worry about the trap, um, where you could fall completely under the spell of your intellect, but because it sort of uh, self denies in its language, it sort of
Mm.
makes uh, it often references its own insufficiency, and the intellect talks about the limits of the intellect, and it's sort of a trick whereby like we it can have us forever, um
Mhm.
because it thinks we're not it, or you get what I'm saying.
Mhm. Yeah, I suspect that we will be able to make I mean, Mike Levin says we already kind of have this like autopoietic machines. Um and you know, it's easy to think that human engineers are in charge of the machines that they build, but even, all these LLMs that are turning the whole human economy upside down, the engineers don't know how they work. So it's not that there's something magic going on, it's that it's it's an emergent property. And and so, if like I was saying before, connecting these different levels, like the frame problem in cognitive science seems to be related to the very nature, the quantum nature of matter, fine tuning. Like if the physical world is um, pregnant with possibility, then it should be possible for uh, us to arrange matter, get matter to arrange itself um, in such a way that it does become autopoietic and capable of relevance realization. I mean, we might need to wait for quantum computing, but I don't. Mike Levin has successfully, and others have convinced me that this machine organism dichotomy is probably inadequate. And so we probably will see something like uh, actually, I don't know, sentient or something like machines with minds. They won't necessarily be like our minds.
Mhm.
They might not be conscious in the way that we're conscious, whether they can feel pain and emotion. I mean, it's going to be quite an alien form of mind.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it will be another expression of what the universe did to create us. And we're tinkering with matter in a way that might give rise to a new lineage of that kind of being. Uh,
Mhm.
that seems like, if not an inevitability, at least the direction things are heading now. And we're gonna have to deal with that.
But are there problems that relate to framing and relevance realization that are um, equivalent to like a hard problem of consciousness right now, where there's like, you're saying that, yeah, this is probably going to happen, but there are
Yeah.
people in it that are like, there is an unbridgeable gap, and it's very clear.
Yeah, there's a lot of turf wars here and tribalism within academia about whether, organisms can be um, made computable in some way such that we could create a relevance realizing machine of some kind.
Yeah.
Um, people get really, and I understand why there are fault lines here among academics, because there's a desire to defend life from the mastery of technoscience, and but I don't think that the technicians actually have any mastery over this stuff. I mean, we have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as a model of how this goes down. Like, we're not in control of our creation
Right.
if we create this, which, you know, maybe we shouldn't. Uh,
Mhm.
that's a decision that we're making, or that our economy is making for us. Um, and we might regret it. But it seems like it's what we're such a curious species. We, you know, act first and ask questions later, and I think that's what we're going to do in this case.
So here's a question. Whatever we create and however careful we are, there's an intellectual process happening where we're imagining what we'd like to create, and what we actually create is going to be some variation of that. Um, the cells that comprise our bodies, even within a Whiteheadian scheme, I don't think he or you would argue that there's evidence that the cells um, are imagining a human being, or like or continually with something akin to a discerning intellect uh, creating us, that they're following more basic feelings
Mhm.
that are giving rise to something, unimaginably complex and ordered and then singular in a way. Uh, the if there's any utility in mapping ourselves as a continuation here, um, there's a way of living life where we're more being guided by bodily feeling, right? And then there's a more intellectual way of approaching life, and then there's gradients, of course. Um, I guess what I'm getting to is that I guess of the same worry that yes, like we're going to create something that is indistinguishable maybe to us from what we imagine an organism is, and we say and maybe it'll be conscious, or maybe it won't be. We won't necessarily know, and so take that as a matter of course, that like, yeah, maybe what we're supposed to do is create the unconscious organism. um and do we worry at all about the possibility that there's some we are supposed to be creating a higher mind, a higher an organism that really feels. And insofar as we're pursuing the one our intellect is asking us to create as a result of trying to map matter to the laws of the intellect, that this more feeling based way of living, it, we may not get to see and behold and think that we understand the being created as a result, but that it would, in fact, create a different sort of being, one maybe more like what the cells
Mm.
are creating in the absence of the intellect.
Yeah. I mean, in anthroposophical terms, you'd be describing this sort of fork in the road of human evolution, where we can either go down the Ahrimanic path, which would be the path of, oh, we're just machines, everything's just mechanical, so let's build better machines, and just fully like dive into and attempt to calculate as best we can the way that this material world operates, and um, create a new race of biomechanoid, beings that live forever and have super strength and intelligence and whatever. Or the other path would be like the more Christic path, which would be to recognize that we are members of a larger body, and we can just barely intuit the glory of that larger body, but our social bonds with one another gives rise to and contributes to the health and vitality of that larger being.
Yeah.
And that's what should motivate us instead of the desire for control over the material world and that kind of literal immortality rather than a sense of immortality in or at least materialistic immortality where like we design bodies that allow us to not never die versus this more um, Christic form of immortality where we're immortalized members of this larger body.
Hmm.
So we as a cell, we might die, but what lives on is this larger body that we contribute to. And I had said this on X last week, seeing a video. Here, let me share my screen and just show this video because it helps to get the picture.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Um, so you've probably seen versions of this. Oops, there we go. We don't need the sound. I'll just turn the sound off. But like, the inside of the cell, this is just a computer model, obviously, but like there are all these little beings running around doing their thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I said, like, the human body is a result of the ritual performance of its cellular and subcellular components. So in
Yeah.
some sense, I am the mystery religion of the cells and proteins composing me. It's a mystery religion because they don't have me consciously in mind. And they're like, all right, come on, guys, we got to make Matt now.
Right.
But they're
Right.
they're worshiping something. Um, and so the same way that, like we don't always feel like we know why we do the things that we do, but we feel like part of something larger, so we soldier on. Like I think there are analogies here that operate across scales. Um,
So do you take a hard stance then? Because I feel like maybe you are more prone to hold the tension between the two views or view the technological path as such an inevitability that the best we can do is try to feed good nutrients into the process. But what would the cell equivalent of pursuing the creation of an AI be? When it'd be like one of those beings down there that was just like walking along, passing things, like stopping, taking a piece, and like trying to form something in the shape of itself, and which to us looks like a very arbitrary shape that should just keep doing whatever it's doing for the larger shape, but it's down there being like, no, it's got to like have like a weird leg here and a thing coming out of the front, and like stop doing that. You're messing up
yeah.
keep doing the dance.
Well, like at some point, like when the first eukaryotic cells formed, it's like some proteins got together and are like, we got to get this place in order. Like we need centralized command. Like let's get the nucleus formed and clean up this place. And um, so there are these protein political movements, at different points in the history of cells that they just decide we're going to organize different.
Hmm.
Um, and that creates a pathway and you can't go back once you make certain decisions. Um, and so like, how do we account for the fact that proteins could be making decisions? This is another example of relevance realization at the scale of macromolecules, um, and we need, I think, to really consider cognition as not just something that brains do, but as something that um, physical processes are engaged in
Hmm.
at every scale. Um, and what's the equivalent of human beings making a bunch of machines? Um, well, I mean, when you watch what's going on inside of a cell at that scale, it's like it does look kind of like a bunch of little machines. Um, but again, it's like the machine organism
What
metaphor.
and but does it look like do parts does any part of the cell does it become clear that that part is trying to make something that is like itself, and I'm not talking about a process by which it itself replicates like in a way that looks natural where something else is just emerges from it, but where there's a like a simplified uh more mechanical version of something that looks like what made it. You know, like the difference between what looks like something giving birth and building a machine, you know, because I think there's a lot of birth happening down there. But yeah,
Mm.
how do we get closer to the part of it that mirrors what we appear to try to be doing by making conscious robots that look like us or act like
Yeah,
us?
well, it looks, I mean, at our scale as human beings, it looks like we're outside building the robot. But if the scale of Gaia, we're inside the cell doing our little tasks, creating new structures. Um, and so it's all a matter of scale. Like if you think of the whole Earth as the cell
Yeah.
that we are little macromolecules inside of, um, then all the stuff that we're building is like, that seems artificial. It's like the cytoskeletons. It's like, ribosomes that do their task to metabolize this or that feature that the Earth that Gaia needs as a whole for whatever purpose that we can barely intuit.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think if you put things in scale like that, then um, what we're what we as human beings are engaged in building that seems artificial is no more artificial than what we were just watching.
Well, yeah, I know artificial is a term that dissolves upon analysis, but uh, you know, when we talk about stress sharing or signs within an organism that something the organism considers bad is happening or something hurts or something, you know, uh, maybe those are the more important parallels to draw. And you know, do we find anything that seems to produce stress on that lower level
Hmm.
that looks like um, a, a sort of wrongly generalized principle, something like the intellect gone
Hmm.
rogue. Yeah, is there something mappable there, or is that am I just saying words?
Maybe, I mean, maybe there's something unique about the human level that we're subject to this um, harmonic misdirection.
Mhm.
Um, because I both want, I have a, I don't know, desire, philosophical desire for there to be these principles operative at every scale. And I have this intuition that the human is unique. Our scale is somehow unique, that we're at the middle. We're um, uniquely placed so as to um, have a free decision that we need to make, about which pathway of evolution we're going to take.
Mhm.
The the one that leads us further into uh, materialization and technocracy, letting the machines roll over us basically, or that allows us to preserve um, that aspect of us that can't be calculated, um, and that would involve a self-sacrificial gesture, like that we are cells of a larger body rather than oh, I'm just going to preserve myself at all costs and live forever, which is that more, transhumanist, technology first kind of approach. But I don't think, yeah, I don't want to sound like I think all of the technological stuff is like evil. Like when I talk about these two paths, I think there's a way in which we can't avoid, learning the secrets of matter and figuring out like how how to do unexpected things, pushing calculation to its limit, and then discovering, like we already are with various technologies where we're not quite sure how it works, but it does talk to us.
Yeah.
And so that seems like it will continue, and we can engage with that um, technological evolution and still remain committed to um, building the body of God. Like we could. I think there are ways in which both pathways can be compatible. Um, we just don't want to lose sight of the larger body that we are a part of, and imagine that we're the new masters. We're the boss in town that gets to determine the course of evolution. That, we're not outside of this system designing it. We're inside of it, and it has its own um, telos and its own trajectory. And to some degree, we have to be humble before that instead of imagining that we might um, come to control everything.
Yeah. You just wonder, if you were to do personality um, tests on the people that are deepest in the tech world, engineering this stuff, and if we had a way of seeing clearly what part of them is most possessed by the process, um, if there's one version of those test results that would be a justification for what you're saying and another cause that would be like, oh no, like something has taken hold here that we really need to be scared of and worried about. Um, where do you see a place for pointing at anything outside of ourselves and saying, in the final analysis, that is to be feared and the evil really is in this case over there right now? Or do you view fear as always a teacher and evil as always something that we need only be working out in our own hearts?
No, I mean, I think evil is real, and it's like, but it's not out there. Um, it's in us, and it's this. It's. I think it really does come down to like the. One way of sort of mythopoetically understanding why salamanders can regenerate and humans can't, like regenerate limbs and stuff, is that we're fallen, and somehow our cells, like, there's something about salamander cells where they they they're in an hedonic state still, whereas for human beings, like we get cancer and stuff because there's this way in which cells get thrown out of the larger field of um, the lure, the eros that leads cells to participate in the mystery religion of me, and they start just making copies of themselves. Like they get selfish. They become cut off from that larger field and refuse to be self-sacrificing. And so if we were to want to, restore this regenerative capacity in human beings, it's like, oh, we need to introduce the Christ cell, like, like you were exploring, that would teach the others, like, oh, imitate Christ, sacrifice oneself in order to avoid becoming cancerous. Like, um,
And would Christ say, let's make an AI? Like that's you know, that's where I'm at with it, where I'm like, is it that what we're talking, that profound participatory thing where we get to help guide, and we have this image of what we're trying to create. Could it be that the very if we believe that we understand what we're creating, the being that we're giving rise to, if it's something we could understand, it's the wrong thing. Like that's what tells us that, you've gone astray because your intellect, you're being guided by this idea that you're creating the right thing if you understand it. And the Christ cell, that teacher, it's very hard to reconcile the pursuit. If we're like Christ was that teacher, um, and like he didn't show up and say, like, guys, just like, I know you guys think there's these big battles, but just like hold the tension between the two and just like allow things to be. He came like, I'm gonna painfully reorder this because we actually, you're
Mm.
going the wrong way for real. uh and so, and what I worry about is that that there's different elements to Christ. There's a sort of this compassion that calls for reconciliation. And when it's like blasted into the intellect, things get like reconciled in that spirit of compassion, which should always be right here. But that, like, that when the intellect, we think our compassion is like helping our intellect in some circumstances where our intellect is like commandeering our compassion and reconciling things that just want to keep existing, when a more human to human compassion where we're trusting, like, the organisms that call most immediately for our compassion are like where it should all go for the most part. And 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 you get back in touch with just like, let's get human to human relations oriented in a way where we're not causing each other so much pain, and that we can't intellectually grasp how that's going to happen. We have to trust these teachers, and just sort of emulate these personalities and really ask in certain circumstances that we think call for our intellect to hold tension or dissolve concepts. Just be like, what would the being that I can like feel their presence, what would they say about, the direction this is going? um
Mm.
and how similar is it to what I'm saying? And I know that's constantly alive for you. I'm just trying to provoke it in relation to this machine organism pursuit.
Yeah. I mean, when we try to reduce life to a mechanism, it becomes like the mechanism of um, of survival, you know, uh, just being self-interested in like propagating one's own current form. And I think what this deeper um, Christic impulse is pointing us to is that life is not that just self-preservation. It's actually it's about self-transcendence ultimately. Um, and the intellect can't understand that. Um, the, the intellect looks for limits and something it can um, yeah, calculate in advance, and you can't calculate transcendence in advance like death. Like you don't know where it's a threshold the mind can't cross. But Christ says, trust me, there's more. And something like we were when I was talking earlier about this, there's this field of possibility. um Mike Levin likes to call it the Platonic morphospace. But I worry he's actualizing it a little too much. It's a possibility space, not some other realm that's pressing into this one. It's a field of potentials that we reach towards and that lure us, but um, I don't want to give too much agency just to the forms, to the eternal objects. And Levin sometimes seems to be doing that. Um, but it's like for so on Whitehead's reading for an actual occasion of experience to dip into that space of possibility and harvest something good and beautiful and true and actualize it, realize it. That realization isn't going to benefit that actual occasion because as soon as that possibility is harvested by that occasion, it dies, it perishes. And who
Mhm.
benefits from that? ingression, the next occasion that inherits what just perished.
Mhm.
And that's the self-sacrificial logic, if you want, though it's a higher logic of the heart, right? Because it's based in a gift.
Mhm.
The potential that's realized is not for me, it's not for this subject. It's superjective. It's given to the next occasion,
Mhm.
right? And so it's a bit like that parable of bunch of people at a table with really long spoons that like they can't get food into their own mouths, and
Mhm.
this can either be heaven or hell. If all the people at the table refuse to help each other, it's hell. Nobody can actually eat, and they're all struggling. But if each person uses the long spoon to feed the person next to them out of the bowl in front of that person, then it all works fine. We just have to feed each other. I feel
Mhm.
like that's the deeper logic of this self-transcendence, and like in order to realize the goodness, truth, and beauty that we want to pull out of the realm of possibility into this actual world, we have to sacrifice ourselves, because what we realize can only be a gift to like the next generation, to the
How do we sacrifice ourselves? Like, how do you know the proper degree of sacrifice? Are we always being called to total sacrifice and accepting any failure to completely give up our egoic pursuits? Are we meant to always acknowledge that that's our fallenness?
well,
Or yeah,
I mean, it's how we restore, recover. It's how we recover grace, but like we have to trust that everyone's going to do it. Like, yeah, if I'm the only one that's going to feed the person next to me with my long spoon, like no one's going to feed me. That sucks.
yeah,
But we hope that we all are, as members of this larger body, that we feed each other.
yeah,
And if everyone sacrifices, then everyone gets the gift,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. And so there's a state we want our behavior to be encouraging in the people we come into contact with our words and bodies and that state. I mean that's the game, right? Like that's it in terms of our participation in this larger body. It's what what we elicit in the beings we come into contact with, and we um right, but that has to do with where we're with the story we're telling them too. Yeah, what where we're aiming them. It's not just about relaxing them and making them feel loved and accepted. You then have to you have to point toward their mission. Um, and yeah, that comes back to this narrative issue. This what's the shared dream of the society? Um, and I think the question I know, I feel sorry for people that are listening to me sometimes because I know that I start like 40 sentences, and if I were to see any
Oh,
of this written,
I've
it
been
would
struggling this morning too. This is hard stuff.
which like you know what? It comes back to the beginning, which is the embarrassment element, because
Hmm.
I normally know what my question is, and all of the reaching and trying to get the right terminology, and I start thinking about the structure of the sentence and wanting to make sure because I don't want to just say what would Jesus say about AI, and like if we were thinking more about Christ all the time, like would we see what we're doing here a little bit more clearly, and there's suffering being generated by it, that if you just see social media as an outgrowth of it and you see what it's doing to the kids, and yes, also there's information being passed along that is productive, and this conversation is a form of social media, and maybe we just need better laws around it, or policies that protect the kids. Um, or you take a broader view and you're like, okay, this what is it? Ahrimanic
Mhm.
Ahrimanic direction we're taking is like obliterating the mental health of the children. And that like we don't need to parse out the like, yes, that's there, but let's look at these other things and hold the tension between the two. That there's like this spiritual torture chamber being opened up here. Um, and that the Christ impulse that cares about that can just say, okay, this is the intellect gone. Like we're trying to make ourselves, we the thing we're create just a bigger version of human, and there's this other being calling for us in this less intellectual way, and it takes a sort of irrational you not being embarrassed about just like blasting through and putting an incredibly irrational symbol just at the center of your thing and oh like and being like that's uh the value where's the is do you feel that do you feel like sometimes you want to blast through all the language and not need to justify your central symbol.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, yeah. Um, I mean, I think I'm trying to connect this to something I saw on CBS News last night that it was they were talking about children's reading levels plummeting since the pandemic, and um like 35 states have just implemented this, public schools have just implemented this new approach to teaching kids to read that's rooted in phonics, they call it, like learning the sounds of the letters. And it's like this very rule-based, systematic approach to teaching the kids to read, um, rather than just like encouraging them, to look at picture books and like, how do we learn how to read? It's a very mysterious process, but they're trying to make it really logical. Um, and it's been going for 2 years, and they're like, oh, good, the test scores have gone up like 13% or something. And it's all about the assessment using the tests, and they're teaching them to pass a specific test to prove that they're reading so that the district can say, yay, we taught the kids to read. And the whole thing struck me as extremely harmonic, which is to say, the kids are being treated like machines that need to be programmed. And what's the deeper, like lost in all of this is the deeper purpose of why we even care about these squiggles, and like why do we want to read? Is it just because, oh well, we need these little creatures to be able to process information and fill out government forms? Like that seems to be what public schools are like. That's why we're teaching them, so they can get a job and fill out the forms, and not to be good citizens. Maybe that's a side effect, but nobody's thinking about um, providing kids with an opportunity to inherit this cultural, thousands of years of cultural expression that you gain access to by learning to read, and how that forms you as a person and gives you a sense of purpose and depth. And um, that's not at all what's driving this. And so I feel like there's this impulse now driving our educational system that's um, more and more we're thinking of ourselves as machines,
Right.
and that's the wrong turn. It's not so much that we shouldn't be. I mean, I'm super interested in new tech and seeing um, how it might facilitate human creativity, but the the danger, the red line, I would say we should avoid crossing is imagining that we ourselves are just reprogrammable machines. Um, and that's what this approach to teaching kids how to read is rooted in, I think.
Mhm.
Um,
Can we think of ourselves as any, is thinking itself, that's the mechanistic impulse. Um,
If
I mean,
it's
that goes back to the question at the beginning about are we can we always talk about how we can't talk about God, um, but it's still worthwhile to make the attempt. Um, and if we try to systematize ourselves like something ineffable, like the process by which we learn to read, um, that something is lost because we think we understand what's going on. Our behaviors being guided by a discerning, conceptualizing. Um, yeah, I'm what I'm struggling with is, like in McGilchrist's book, what did he say? We need we need both the one and the both, or something like that.
Yeah, we need both either or and both and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, and that stance, it must be made by the thing that's writing out words, by the like uh, and we're having this conversation, and so anything I say now, I'm still going to be trying to justify in some way using intellectual logic. Um, but it's really not like native to me in some strange way. In a way, I think I mean, you're educated on a whole different level. And, um, for me, maybe just observing my own nature and the way that I just really I come in and out of contact with these conceptual schemes, and some part of me feels like whenever I reapproach them, that I should be trying to like resurrect how I understood them before, and like build on that and like go deeper in.
Mhm.
But then somewhere along the way of any of these schemes, I feel like the scheme itself is beckoning me to like turn off my intellect, like just like let it go. And then I'm just a way smarter person as like an embodied creature in the world. I feel like the things I feel like I can make happen with other people and just around the place it's coming from, I have no idea. And then when I try to get really systematic in my thinking, I listen to myself back, it's so sloppy, it's not uh and I as you know, as I've been thinking about the central figure of Christianity more, um and trying to base my sense of what's right and wrong on this like ongoing meditation on a personality it really isn't a set of propositions. It's like it's someone I feel like I found like somewhere in just my putting tentacles out there into whatever. It's like, oh, like I touched something that feels like yeah, an essence. And that thing I think I've said in a few of our conversations, that an insight I do come back to the idea that a personality, what we're pointing to with the word personality, um, yeah, I can't really say it. All I'll say is yeah, meditating on the personality of Christ, and there's something so irrational about that. It doesn't really, I can't make sense of that at all. And so my attempts to make sense of these questions that we come back to, yeah, maybe all I'm doing right now is observing my own intellectual inadequacy and trying to level that as a critique about the intellectual project as a whole. But that's hypocritical because I gain so much benefit from the work other people do in the space. So, yeah, but and you're at peace there, it seems, right? Like you have this intertwined, you know how to stay heart-centered while playing the game of logic in a pretty stable way. Do you ever feel, does the stability, do you lose it ever? Or is that solid for you?
I mean, hmm, I seek to, understand as best I can what this what who, what, and how, who Christ is, how Christ works, and like what I want to understand.
Yeah.
But I know, but I also, yeah, there's a limit there. Um, Paul says something like in the New Testament, like, this is the way of the cross, or, the incarnation is going to sound like foolishness to the wise. And he
Mhm.
means to the, the Stoic philosophers and all these smart thinkers who, for whom this story just is incredible.
Yeah.
Um, and I, I, it embarrasses the mind,
Yeah.
you know, but it opens the heart. And I don't think one should, like, I don't and can't sacrifice my intellect. Um, I don't think we need to sacrifice the intellect. It's just the intellect needs to recognize its dependence,
Yeah.
um, which is precisely this relevance realization thing, this frame problem thing. It's like the intellect, if it thinks that it's independent, will eventually discover it's imprisoned,
Mhm.
that it can't break out of this cage of calculation that's created for itself. Like pure intellect couldn't even make a decision on anything
Right.
because there are always going to be multiple options that compute, but without any sense of value, you can't decide.
Mhm.
And so the intellect is dependent on this deeper source of value. Um, and I think you can understand this in cognitive science with this relevance realization issue, this frame problem issue, and you can understand this in terms of theology and the
Yeah.
limits of rational understanding and where something more like revelation becomes um, operative.
Yeah.
And it's not, this isn't, doesn't need to be irrational. It's just um, intellect alone is not enough. It's kind of like what Ian McGilchrist says with the master and his emissary. It's like we've made the intellect the master. It's never intended, it can't be the master. It doesn't,
Yeah.
the heart has to be um, the intellect is the emissary, the assistant, not supposed to be in charge. So, yeah, there are ways of making sense of it, but it's still obviously, as an academic who wants to engage in these debates about how to solve the frame problem, for example, if I just throw in God and eternal objects or whatever, it raises eyebrows. And I might not be, it signals that I'm not a part of that club that wants to figure it out without making reference to such
Yeah.
ideas. But it might be
And
impossible to solve them otherwise.
some of this is coming from recent reading I've been doing of Steiner and the constant hearkening back he does to earlier states of consciousness, which I got plenty of from like Jung and Neumann as well. But um, something about the way Steiner talks about it, it makes me long for it.
Hmm.
Uh, and when you say you're not going to sacrifice your intellect, well, of course not. And he frames materialism and the rise of the intellect as a spiritual process. Um, in some sense, he a more even more spiritual than what preceded it. He says
Hmm.
that yeah, man became more spiritual as a materialist, but like denied himself as spirit or something like that. Um, but when we say we're not going to sacrifice the intellect, there's the sense of like, well, what would be there without it? And from these great minds that have effectively harken back enough to like wake some of that up in you when you read them, feels like it's a more enchanted world. Uh, and then when we really look at the project of the intellect, or the project of trying to introduce more process thinking and more reference to the divine into that intellectual process, like trying to reintroduce enchantment. Um, and I guess it'll be enchantment, 2.0, where there's I guess we're more awake for it. There's like we had enchantment, but we couldn't fully we didn't know what we had when we were in these enchanted states of consciousness. And the introduction of the discerning intellect lifts us out of that, and we're still sort of in this period where we have a sense of what we lost, but we don't want to lose this new thing, and we'd like to re-enter um, that enchanted consciousness and now know what we have. Um, I maybe would be one way of framing
Hmm.
a spiritual narrative, like what we're doing right now is like, yes, like we know whatever we're doing right now, it's cost a lot, and like we've done something to how we perceive life that really hurts. But if we turn back and lapse, yes, we'll go back, but we won't know what we have, so then we'd inevitably do the same thing over again. So like we have to push through. We're not going to shed this. We have to, but we do need to re-enchant life, meaning like sensitize the part of us that feels agency more fluidly, feels personality. It can map personality onto, 'cause, yeah, an enchanted consciousness. Yes, everything's personality. Um, but
Hmm.
how is it different? I don't know. Do you think I'm making that distinction right, where the enchanted consciousness doesn't know what it has, the intellect, it's like a cold bridge so that then we can re-enchant the world and know what we have?
Yeah, it's like that T.S. Eliot poem to like return again to where we began, but to know it for the first time.
Okay.
The redoubling. But yeah, I mean that's the basic story of the evolution of consciousness is
Yeah.
a movement from uh like in Owen Barfield's terms, a form of original participation where there's no differentiation to a a null point where we are now, say that there's maximal alienation and we feel totally severed and separate from
Yeah.
um, a sense of meaningful participation in the universe. And we're trying to recover this final participation that would be um, reconnecting, reintegrating, but in a way that lets us preserve our consciousness of that. Um, so it's it would be a kind of reunion of the mind and the heart, whereas originally there was only um, like we didn't have when we were just cells, you know, um, we didn't have the freedom and the knowledge of what we were doing, of the process we were engaged in. We just did it. And we're trying to recover that, but with a sense of agency and freedom. Um, but there's this period, this intervening period of humbling and humiliation, really, which is seems to be what we're going through. And something about the absurdity of the Christ story, I feel like, is like us having to have our intellects humiliated to like to take it seriously. Like
Yeah.
just like Christ was God being humiliated to like fully experience to be lowered to the level of the human, but in so doing to be raised to the level of the human in a sense too. Um, like that there's something that the divine couldn't experience until incarnating and dying as a human being, which from our point of view looks really humiliating, but is actually um, an invitation for us um, to go through that process of humiliation to then be humbled, but come out the other side, uh, where come out the other side such that our minds and our hearts are reconnected. Um,
So that sacrifice, yeah, you can abstract it, and but then there's what it appears to demand of us as individuals, and that's difficult to look at. I've been rereading Varieties of Religious Experience and all those accounts of the ascetic monks who put themselves through all kinds of like, awful pain,
Mhm.
and those are always strange to read because it's hard to put yourself there and like really that's what you thought it was meant by the sacrifice. Like, would in a
Mm.
lot of them he says end up in states of intense pleasure to where like I don't know, it can become like that's almost like the darkest image possible is like a monk who started his journey with good intentions, like moved toward the Christ and ended up like masturbatorily torturing himself in a bed. It's just that's a uh but if we just imagine like giving up all our possessions and going to live among um, drug addicts in Kensington, Philadelphia, which like I know a guy who's done that. This guy Shane Claiborne that I just saw recently.
Mm.
Um, yeah, he's like this really Christian guy, really just like full of love. And for the last, it's been like 15, 20 years now. He started this nonprofit in Kensington, Philadelphia, called The Simple Way, and he just like lives there and with a small community of people, they grow their own food and just like make themselves available to the people around them and run little summer camps, and they're really just good people in the midst of an open air drug market. And, the idea being, where's the suffering? We're supposed to just go directly at it.
Yeah.
And that any justification we put forward for why that is sort of what we're doing, if you think about it conceptually, or not everyone is called in the same way, uh, that y- the example given to us, like there's no kind of, well, that would mess this up for me, or that would break this, there's not the example given to us was like, yes, it's not like Jesus said, hey, take the risk. What's that Terence McKenna quote? Like the abyss and find that it's a feather bed. You might find that it's a feather bed after you get crucified, but like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not before. So it's not like a trick. It's like, no, you got to move right into the fire, and what's that fire? Like it's like where I think it is. It's just where are the suffering people, and how do I help them? Um,
Yeah.
but it's embarrassing, right? Because even when asking yourself the question, there's part of you that knows your sacrifice is going to be limited. It's not gonna measure up. And
Yeah.
so like you don't want to frame it that way because then you kind of look silly when then you say like, yeah, but I'm just going to keep doing what I do. That's the embarrassment is all over this thing.
Yeah. But yeah. This came up in politics recently with JD Vance talking about, in an interview he did, the like concentric circles of care that radiate out from family to community to, town to nation to world.
Yeah.
And he thinks liberals have inverted that and they care too much about the world. And he's like, he says Vance said it was a Christian thing, a Christian value to move out from what's closest to you, your family, and then your circle of concern does touch the world, but that's the last thing you should think about. And I don't know that that's Christian. I mean, yeah, Paul says something like that, and Augustine says something like that. It's a teaching in church life, that ends up being akin to what nowadays conservatives call family values, but that's not actually what Jesus taught.
Mhm.
He literally said, only those who hate their family can follow me. And what he means is don't love people just because you're related to them.
Yeah.
Love people because they're people and recognize that there's one community
Yeah.
of all beings and the bloodlines we draw are not real anymore. Um, and so the real teaching is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And I don't begrudge anyone, for loving their family first, like of course. And on some level, practically speaking, we got to start at home. We can't all be, but think about the spoon metaphor again with the everyone at the table. You have to feed your neighbor, and be fed by your neighbor and like trust that those concentric circles will work out. But yeah, what Jesus was actually calling us to do might be impossible for us as finite beings because instinctually we love our family. You have kids, you love your kids. You're going to protect your kids before you rush out to protect someone else's kids on the other side of the world. I mean, that's just
Mhm.
natural. Or what Christ is teaching in some sense is not natural, but it could become so if it's an ideal that we're striving for, and it will continue to embarrass us until we realize it. Um, but that's the point. Like it's supposed to stretch us. Um, it's supposed to stretch us beyond our comfort zone so that we
Yeah.
continue to grow. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there,
Just sorry.
let me read. I want to read a few lines from Paul that I was trying to recount from memory earlier, and it's from First Corinthians where he talks about what we've been talking about. Um, it's First Corinthians chapter 1. Um, but I'll start with verse 18. He says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written," and he quotes Isaiah, "I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand signs, and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength, and so on. Um,
Mm.
yeah, so there's this inversion going on that confounds our usual ways of calculating life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as I battle to stay in contact with that, um, I'm stumbling more through conversations like this because when I feel right now, at least the more I try to figure things out, just right now, maybe it's just I lead myself astray. Like I don't feel as close to that core symbol because it is irrational, and I think I so would like it not to be because the idea of uncovering a way to justify it in some final way that makes it not vulnerable to arrows, intellectual arrows from outside. Um, and so, yeah, it's so appealing to think that could be possible. And, when I'm reading like St. Augustine right now, and it's like a brilliant logician applying himself in the realm of religion. He does a really good job of just sort of accepting the terms, um, and he deploys his intellect incredibly, but it doesn't break out of the frame and question the frame, right? It just has the frame. Um,
Mm.
and that's where a lot of the power in it lies. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, you don't necessarily, I don't know if you want to post this conversation because I feel anybody, people come to the channel to sort of follow you take them on journeys and where I'm kind of probably just bringing them into my own process right now. But yeah, like
I think this is valuable. I think this is relatable. I think this kind of conversation would be helpful for people because they're probably struggling with exactly what you're struggling with.
okay, good. Yeah, I
Me
guess
too.
and well, yeah, just to bring it, like the writing I've been doing recently.
Mm,
Um, I'm I'm getting a lot out of filtering things into a narrative
mhm,
right now because there's sort of it's true if it like doesn't disturb my own reading experience upon rereading it. Like that there's this desire I have to justify these concepts that I'm intrigued by logically. And there's never that like you did it feeling. It never, there's not the ever that satisfaction of like it's been justified. But I find putting the ideas into a narrative and letting characters and the way I imagine them start to feel like they take on a life of their own a little bit. Then reading it back, wrong is it took me out of it, and right is I'm being drawn deeper into this story. Uh, yeah, I think maybe it's time for me to read more novels as well because I think like a lot
mm,
of people that are interested in philosophy, right? You start your reading out with nonfiction, and then it seems like all these people are reading like stories. I'm trying to get to the truth, um, and yeah, in my own experience, and yeah, it goes back to being drawn back to Christianity, right? So it's a story about a character, It's like there's something and for me I feel wiser when I'm imagining a flow of events, and I feel foolish when I start trying to justify like the existence of events. Um
mm,
and I sound like a fool to myself. And even in writing the script, I'm getting more sensitive to moments where, there's an idea I want to get in there. And so a character simply finds occasion to state an idea, right? Um, that those are the most fun to write in the moment because I'm trying to distill the idea into word. And then as I read through it, when I get to that line, that's always the line that's like, something got in here that like wasn't just like part of this flow, right? And I'm like, okay, and just I don't then give up on getting the idea in there, but it's like, how do I massage this thing until it's there, even if it's only just barely there now, but like I just have to, my eye can't get caught by, oh, someone had a thing to say. Because when
right.
you read other people's scripts, that is the most annoying thing. That's like the number one sign. Like, oh, they're just like, oh, I'm smart because I have this idea, and you're not drawing me into a story. Um, and so, yeah, I think overall for me right now in my process, whether it's engaging with the story of Christianity or my own reading and writing being more narrative, um, that facilitates the right marriage between intellect and embodiment.
Mm.
Um, yeah, for me right now.
You mentioned maybe reading some novels might help with the writing process. There's a novel by Kazantzakis, a Greek writer, called The Last Temptation of Christ that
Uh,
Scorsese made into a film in the 80s. That's about like the plot is I haven't read it, but I want to. The plot is basically Jesus decides not to go through with the crucifixion plan and just marries Mary Magdalene and has kids in a normal life and then reflects and suffers just like a normal human being and wonders like, huh, maybe I should have maybe I should have done the whole Son of God thing and made him.
No way. I had no idea that was the plot of The Last Temptation of Christ. Wow, I have
Yeah.
to read that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super relevant, probably. Uh,
Maybe I should have done the Son of God thing. That's great. Uh, well, my wife called me and she wants to go to a farmer's market
do it.
nearby. So I should get off here. And yeah, okay. Yeah, anybody that made it through this, I apologize. Hopefully, yeah, there was something relatable in my struggle.
Well, I
Uh,
enjoyed it. I enjoyed this. Always do.
Me too, man. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, Roman. Take care. Bye.